So I'm absolutely delighted to be here with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Bill Pettit. And in preparation for this conversation, I put out an invitation to my community asking for questions for Bill. We got some amazing questions, so we're going to be referring to those and answering those and that sort of thing. But what I thought I'd mention just to kick off is that, Bill's been working with the principals exclusively for seeing patients in a variety of contexts for over 40 years and working with diagnoses as diverse as schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder, stress, panic attacks, all kinds of stuff. And his assertion is clear, which is there's something that you can learn and understand that is both the prevention and the cure to all mental illness and most physical illness. And as I said to Bill before we hit the record button, I said, that's a bold claim. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I like it. And there's that old saying that bold claims require bold evidence. So I think what we're going to be doing in this conversation is uncovering the bold evidence for that claim. And I think the questions that people submitted are going to give us a great context to do that within. So Bill, thank you so much for joining us here and welcome. And yeah, thank you for that provocative statement to kick off with. And here's my guess. My guess is to you, it doesn't even seem very provocative. Doesn't even seem that bold, even though it can look that way on the face of it. But what's your sense of that as we sit here right now?
Well, I see the boldness of it, but I know the truth of it. I mean, it's like Sid, Sid Banks, he said bold things, but I kept waiting to, as I reflected on things through the years, to find something that he said that I didn't then experience for myself as true. So everything that I'll talk about today is not, even though I might mention Sid Banks, and I encourage people to read all 6 of his little books. They're, 88 to 160 pages long, and they're easily read. And I think they deserve at least 2 readings, each one of them. But there's nothing that I'll say today that I'll say because Sid Banks said it. It'll be because Bill Pettit had a realization from within that truth, that place of the truth meter, Jamie, that we all have, where I said, oh, holy shit. And usually it came at a moment of quiet, maybe after a nap or waking up in the morning, or a time that I was just stunned by the birds flying in formation, or the different colored flowers in spring, or something that stopped my attention to my analytical mind and allowed what I'll call divine mind to come through, because it just needs a crack. And then you have a realization. And I was talking about this yesterday. I'm on the end of this course, and I encourage people to especially newer people that haven't read Sid's books a lot, that there's a program that the 3 Principles Global Community has put together. It's an 18-week program. Next Tuesday is the 18th week. Right. Okay. And what it is, it's 18 weeks. Myself and Judith Sedgman are going through the Enlightened Gardener Revisited, and we're going to be going through the last 40 pages, but the people that have done each book anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks are people that knew Sid for many years, and it's a and right now I think it costs $450. It has cost live. I've heard through the grapevine that it's going to be much less when they make it available as a recording. Cool. So anyway, I don't know what made me think. Well,
I want to echo your point, though. I would encourage anyone who's listening to this to check out Sid's books, to check out his videos and audios. I've every single one of those books and almost every one of those audios and all the videos I've watched many, many, many times. And many of the most profound, life-changing insights that have made a difference to me have come as a result of engaging with those materials and the ideas within them. So yeah, strong endorsement of what you said, Bill.
And I know I'm talking to the choir, because you have people say, well, a 9th grade education, a welder, what is this, a cult? Is it whatever, but I tell people, I've never heard any cult leader say, please don't believe anything I say. Please don't, because if you do, you've given up your freedom of thought.
Well, it's funny when I first came to the principles, because I was kind of like, is this a cult? So I went over to Cult Watch and went through their checklist.
Right.
And some of the things it gets a check for, but some of the most important things it doesn't, like has a, there are all kinds of things. So well, it's interesting, Bill. I'd be interested in your take on it, because when I came to the principles, my orientation was, I kind of wanted to take a kind of scientific approach. And if something was being claimed to be true, I wanted to test it and see if I could find counterexamples, see if I could find anomalies. I wanted to stress test it. I wanted to push it to its limits. And I have continued to do that. So I stumbled across the principles in 2009. So I've spent the last 13, 14 years looking for exceptions and looking for anomalies and looking for cases where it doesn't add up. And I haven't been able to find one. And I've been properly looking for them, because I'm not interested in a belief system. Right. I mean, the thing that really got my attention with these principles is the assertion that these are bedrock facts about the human experience. And my take is, if they're facts, then they're there to be seen, and they're going to be constant and reliable, and there won't be exceptions. And that if something seems like an exception, I need to understand what's going on there. And yeah, they're holding up real good so far. So yeah, I'll check in again in a decade and see how it's looking. But yeah, they're holding up real well. And so I was curious, what was because you said that you're not passing on what Sid said, you're passing on what you've seen. What are some of the things you've seen, Bill, that have made a profound and lasting difference in your life?
I'm going to go back to your thing about this. This is something about the human experience. I forget how you said it. Me
too.
Well,
I said these are. I'm not interested in a belief system,
right.
But the thing that got my attention was that I was told that these principles are pre-existing facts. They're fundamental truths that underpin the human experience, and that are, creating the human experience. And as such, they're constant, they're predictive, they're explanatory. They're principles, like gravity's a principle, or yeah.
Okay, well, one of the reasons that and even as I address these questions, that if people try to hear the answer from their intellect, I loved the example you gave in Clarity, where you talked about from the Star Trek movie, where Spock had devised and correct me if I understand it or quote it, but he devised a game that was unwinnable. and Kirk won it. He won he solved the unsolvable situation, and Spock claimed, well, but you cheated. And Kirk's point was, once you've created something that's unwinnable, there's no rules. Something like that. Did I capture that at all?
Yeah. That if it's an unwinnable game, you don't have to play by the rules.
Well, the metaphor, like all metaphors, is not perfect, but if people try to, even as I go these questions on, one is on hormones and their effect. One is on what if you have seizures? Another one is on manic episodes. Another one is on Alzheimer's. Another one is on what I'll call the ADHD or autism processors. If people innocently, I mean, to some degree they all will, but I'm going to ask people to thank their brain for sharing their comments and listen inside to whether, even if what I say doesn't seem possible to their intellect, whether their truth meter is going towards truth or bullshit. Because I think, Jamie, that we have a truth meter that's at the core of our being. It's that, that quote of the Jesuit, I can't ever say his name, John Pure, anyway, that says we are spiritual beings having a human experience. A lot of people say that and have, you can tell by the next sentence that they speak, have no idea what they just said.
Yeah.
Here's what I've made of what Sid said. Way beyond creating our human experience. As he says in Enlightened Gardener Revisited, these principles, it's a paradox. These principles are not of this world. They're not of this world. They're before time, space, and matter. The paradox is that without these formless principles, we could not experience this world of form. Without a mind, without awareness, without the creative faculty of the power of thought, we could not experience this world of form that we find ourselves in at birth. In the pages that we were reading yesterday from the Enlightened Gardener Revisited, and I won't try to find the quote, but he said, when we are born into our second home, we immediately are given these gifts of mind, thought, and consciousness to navigate through this world of form. Well, that's a powerful second home. I don't think most people have, I mean, and if it's just a cognitive thing, but most people, I don't know that most people have the awareness, true awareness or realization that this is their second home. Now, meaning that I came from formlessness, I've been given this form to join with my formless self, my formless being, and there'll be a time when I shed this, and I go back home. Well, to the degree that one not believes that, if you just believe it, beliefs get in the middle of, they don't do very well, but realizations do well.
Mm.
And as people start to have the realization that this is their second home, and that they're like everybody else. I said the other day, I said, death, it seems like, what is it, 84% of people die eventually? Well,
I think it's as high as 85 these days, Bill.
85, yeah, it's somewhere in that range. So, it's likely that you're going to be, somebody said, what are you talking about? But just the point that we all die. And some of us die after 30 minutes, and some of us die after 118 years, like that nun in France that died. In eternity or infinity, it's not even a speck of sand.
Yeah.
But to the degree that I know, that this is my second home, to the degree that becomes more and more real, and you talked about that, things that are happening for you even in the last couple of months, or me too. I feel like I've seen more in the last 3 to 4 years than I saw in the first 36.
Wow.
And that's I could either say, God, I'm such a slow learner, or I could just be like Sid says. People say, how do you find that wisdom? And he says, just be grateful for what you have seen, and you'll continue to see more.
Bill, I'd love to sit with that for a moment, because I think what you've just kind of dropped there in a single line or two is actually going to be hugely valuable to everyone who listens. So I remember I was once, this is probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, no, probably 10 years ago even. But I was frustrated with my progress with the principles. Like, I'd been learning it for a few years, and it had made a big difference to me, and I was very grateful for that. But I felt like, I should be doing better at it. I should understand it better. I should have deeper grounding and all that sort of stuff. And without knowing it, what I discovered was that I'd been playing this game of kind of, how am I doing? How am I doing today? How am I doing compared to how I was yesterday? And all that sort of stuff. And one of my, I'm listening to a Sid recording one day, and I hear, just be grateful for what you've already seen, and you'll see more. And it kind of, I was like, whoa, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but I think it is, because I think that sense of striving and trying to get somewhere, not that there's anything wrong with getting somewhere. Like, if I need to go to Liverpool, then I need to get somewhere, but trying to get somewhere psychologically and spiritually,
yeah.
There's something about just giving yourself the gift of appreciating and being grateful for what you've already realized that just seems to open the floodgates for more.
Right.
And I just love to hear your take on that, because you've got a little more experience than me in that regard.
Well, I think we're all drinking from the same well. I've had people, as you know, that fellow that was 47 years with chronic schizophrenia in the state hospital 6 months after I had Sid. He saw, when he came out of his 47 years of schizophrenia, he saw beyond what I had seen at the time. He saw not only that, as he said, that I've been making myself crazy for 47 years with my own thinking. But he said that the second thing that I had not seen, Jamie, he said, and I don't have to do it anymore. I had a 3-year follow-up. I got him out of the hospital a number of weeks later after 47 years. People couldn't believe
How bad.
It challenged every belief about, but it was obvious he was fine.
Yeah.
And I had to get him off all his medicines as fast as possible because they were now poison to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had a 3-year follow-up. See, now, when I sat in front of Sid, April Fool's Day, 1983, coming up on 40 years, I met George Pransky January 1st. So it's been my 40-year. When I, within 30 minutes, had the real, after going in and out of clinical depression for 20 years, seeing 6 different psychiatrists who were really good people. They have nothing but compassion for anybody who practices psychiatry or psychology without this understanding. I have complete compassion. Wow. Talk about trying to doing with one harm. That it's not by accident that survey a couple of years ago in 2020 showed that 78% of the 2,064 psychiatrists in the United States that filled out the survey, now there's some selection, on well-being and burnout, 78% meant burnout. It'd be like if you had 50 doctors treating pneumococcal pneumonia and they had penicillin, and another 50 doctors, which until World War II, people think penicillin's been here forever. Yeah. Until 19 whatever it was, and we had it in the United States, the French were collecting our urine and getting penicillin out of our urine for their soldiers. If you had 50 other doctors who were trying to treat pneumococcal pneumonia without penicillin, wow, who what every day to see people dying in front of you that didn't have, that these people are, and it's that dramatic, but it's the paradigm, as you quote Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolution in Clarity. He says, even when a paradigm is in crisis, it will not be replaced until there is a paradigm that can answer those anomalies and those questions. And the present paradigm, and then I'll go back to Sid, what Sid saw. The present paradigm of psychiatry and psychology is based on assumptions that it's not working. And Dr. Tom Insel, I know you've probably heard me quote this quote before, and even though he backed away from it in his book, and he's a good man, he's a year younger than I, he was the psychiatrist director of the National Institute of Mental Health from 2002 to 2015, I think it is. I had read it down somewhere. Here's what he said in 2012. This is the director of the National Institute of Mental Health. We are so embedded in this structure. We have spent so much time diagnosing mental disorders that we actually believe they are real. Wow. But there is no reality. These are just constructs. And for those whose brains are about ready to fry, I will talk about this in a way, I think, just relax and take this in. I will talk about it in ways that I think will make sense. These are just constructs. There's no reality to schizophrenia or depression. We might have to stop using terms like depression and schizophrenia because they are getting in our way and confusing things. Holy crap. This is the director of the National Institute of Mental Health, who still doesn't see, but he's desperate now. I think desperate is my word, but he wants to, before he dies, like I say, he's a year younger than I. I've read his book on healing, and he's gone back from these statements because I think he wouldn't have gotten his book published. Whatever we've been doing for 5 decades, you and I talked about this since we got psychiatric medications, it ain't working. I think he used the word ain't purposely to get people's attention. And when I look at the numbers of suicides, number of disabilities, mortality data, it's abysmal. And it's not getting any better. All the ways in which we've approached these illnesses, with a lot of people working very hard, the outcomes we've got to this point are pretty bleak. Wow. So I had gone through 20 years of intermittent clinical depression to where I would get to where I would be almost immobilized and unable to move. Because of 6 different psychiatrists that I saw, and their compassion and their caring and I was able to make it through to where I never had to be hospitalized. I never had to stop my education. I went through medical school on probably 2 cylinders out of 8, 2.5 most of the time. So I didn't do real well. But so when I used to tell people, God, now that I have the clarity and the internal serenity and peace that I have, I would love to go through medical school again. They said, are you crazy? So, but I've just become a lifelong learner for the last
Same
50
here, by the way, Bill.
Yeah, I know, and I see that. And so when I was sitting in front of Miss Sydney Banks after George Pransky, sitting with George for about 6 weeks earlier for a couple of hours, and if you would have been waiting at the coffee shop after I had 2 in 1983, we had no books. There was no books. There was no videotapes. And George, even the clarity about the principles Sid said, these principles, I did not discover, these principles found me. I had seen something profound, and I was trying to talk about them as best as I could. And then I was given this metaphor of the principles that then people forget that it's a metaphor.
Yeah, it's funny, Bill. I've listened to a lot of Sid's early material for many years, and as best I can tell, the metaphor of principles doesn't show up till about 96. And before that, like, I haven't heard any recordings before that where he's talking about them as principles. But it seems to me that the metaphor of principles, like, this is my 2 cents, and you can feel free to shoot it down if you don't agree, but it looks to me like Sid saw what the great sages through history saw, what Jesus and Buddha and he saw that so deeply. And the thing that Sid had available to him that none of the others did was the metaphor of principles. The metaphor of principles is a relatively recent innovation, and understanding that the principle for human beings, principles are not a recent innovation, but the metaphor of scientific principles is recent. And seeing something as a principle brings into connection a whole different type of learning than intellectual learning. Once as human beings, we instinctively have place a high value on reality signals because we learn from those. Even a baby who's got dribble on their chin is learning about the world. through that sensory input, and they're learning by what the psychologists call statistical learning. It's raw data that gets converted into learning experiences, and that's what the metaphor of principles brings into connection for us. So it looks to me like that seeing the truth of this and expressing it as principles looks to me unique. Like, I don't think anyone had ever done that before.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're kind of had a free flow here, and if you need to bring me back, just feel free. But is it okay? Are you okay?
Go for it, man.
So when you talk about a small child, I think even it's so easy to start to buy into. People say, you don't know anything, and then you start learning stuff. Well, there's really the early, I don't know a lot of it, but if you take a 3-month-old baby and you show them pictures of flowers on a table, they'll look at it for a little bit, and then they'll start looking around other things. If you show them a picture of a vase of flowers, not on a table, in the, like in the air, in a room, they look at it for, I forget how many times, 8 to 10 times longer, because it's not true. If we are divine mind in a form, divine mind is powering our brain from the instant that we are alive. And divine mind is beyond intellectual learning. And now people don't know what to do with that, because how does it's funny, I read Sapolsky, and I'm going to write these down for my course that we're going to talk about sometime later, but he just, when he faced with something like this, he says, somehow he uses somehow, I don't know how many times in this 600-page book, because without the principles, all you can say is somehow. somehow but so anyway, so I'm going to go to, before we go to these questions, and we might end up having a break before we do that, but I'd like to answer your question, because about what did Sid see? What do I see that Sid saw? I mean, at least what what have I seen from what Sid saw, or whatever that is? It's an echo of an echo of an echo, right? It's much bigger than thought creates our experience. The power of thought, the principle of thought, it's much bigger than that. I mean, if we really see that, it isn't any bigger. But most people see that at a cognitive level.
Yeah, it ain't cognitive.
Okay. So I love this quote from Sid, and people that haven't watched the Long Beach videos that are available, I'm sure you point to them on sidbanks.com. He said, when he's describing his experience, he said, I stood up, and it was like I was being sucked down a tunnel, and there was a buzzing sound, and I was enveloped in a white light. And it was then that I realized the true meaning of God, and I started to cry. Wow. That's a little bit bigger than I saw that my thinking creates my feelings. Another time I heard him say, I saw what people call God is. I saw what life is. And I saw how the two are connected. Wow. That's another way of saying, and you've heard me do this. So did you hear me that I read The Enlightened Gardener for the 16th time? And what happened when I did?
If I did hear you say that, I'd love to hear it again because I don't recall.
Well, for a course I was doing, I started The Enlightened Gardener for the 16th time.
Mhm.
And if you can see, it says chapter 1, a conference in England, where
Yeah.
these 4 psychologists, one of whom is, has had this experience with this enlightened gardener and brings his 3 friends the next year to England. And do you notice something else?
I can see there's a note to the reader. I can't read anything
Note
else.
to the reader. Do you know what it says there?
I don't recall.
Yeah, that most of us don't. And in fact,
Well, to be fair, I don't recall what it says in chapter 1 either.
right. But the note to the so I'm reading this for the 16th time, and for the first time, I mean, I should be probably chagrined that, that to tell this, but it's just true. I may not be good, but I'm slow, I tell people, for the first time in the 16 times, this book has not changed. That a note to the reader has been there the first 15 times. And I was going so fast still, even though it was slower than I used to be significantly, that I did not see on the left side of the page a note to the reader in big bold print, every bit as big as this. And I thought, a note to the reader? Hell, that's me. Maybe I should read what it says. And this goes, to me, this is another way of saying, I saw what God was, what people call God is. I saw what life is. And I saw how the two are connected.
Mm-hmm.
It says the same thing 100 different ways.
Yeah.
And trying to take another avenue to try to not to reach our intellect, but to touch our soul. In this simple book, the author endeavors. I love that word. I love his use of words. For somebody with a 9th grade education, I think the muse of divine mind works through him. The author endeavors to explain in his own unique way the connection between our spiritual nature, formless, and our psychological nature. I would add, and our psychological and physical natures. But that's just me as a physician. The connection between our spiritual nature, and that's what these principles are a metaphor that are trying to point to, the connection between our spiritual nature and our our thought created nature.
Mm-hmm.
Experience. And people have been reluctant. We talked about this, Jamie, and stop me at any time, but scientists have been reluctant, especially to look at the spiritual, partially because, guys, it wasn't too long ago that they were burning people at the stake because they said that the earth, the guy, I forget, there was a guy in Italy that Galileo realized, shit, they're serious about this because they burned him at the stake when he said it. So Galileo, I guess I was mistaken.
I've had a chance to rethink this.
I've had a chance to rethink this, and so anytime there's been a breakthrough in any, there was a, the fellow in England, Harvey, in 1628, discovered how the body, how the heart works. It seems like, how is that religious, right? How is that, how it pumps the oxygenated blood out? It's used by the muscles, capillaries take it over to the veins, goes back up to the lungs, to the heart, goes to the lungs, gets oxygenated, comes back into the left side of the heart, goes out. There was a fellow in Spain 50 years before Harvey that explained what Harvey did. and they burned him at the stake for heresy.
That's rough.
Holy crap. So they have been wedded. So people are they're a little reluctant to talk about the spiritual.
Well, I mean, the other thing that occurs to me, Bill, I mean, the scientific method looks to me like a pretty incredible invention. Like in the history of inventions, that looks like one of the most fruitful inventions there is. But what I found is that, and reading Kuhn kind of backed this up actually, is that for a lot of people, they're working within the current boundaries of science that have been established, and that's quite right for them to do that. That's the, kind of conducting normal science is where most of scientists spend their time, and that's within the paradigms that have already been established. And the establishing of a new paradigm, whether it's in physics or chemistry or medicine or whatever, that's a big deal, and it's not easy for science to embrace a new paradigm. It probably shouldn't be easy. Like it's another of those bold claims require bold evidence. And so I have a real question over whether the fields of psychology and psychiatry and medicine where there will ever be a point where they will embrace this understanding, or whether it's going to be, as we've discussed before, more of a grassroots thing, because it may be that the kind of boundary pressure that it would place on either the boundary pressure would be too great for the existing models, or the evidentiary process required to establish this as a scientific paradigm is just like that. Once that there's too much involved to do it. That like I don't know. You'll be closer to it than me, but it seems really understandable that science hasn't embraced this with open arms.
Absolutely. I mean, what you said. Anytime there's been a breakthrough, neuroplasticity. When I graduated from medical school in 1969, it was gospel truth that once you had the pruning of the brain cells in adolescence, once that was completed, the only thing you could do was to lose brain cells.
Mm.
You could not, they weren't replaceable, like in the liver or in our skin. We're replacing, I think we're replacing 1 million cells a second or something like that, a minute or something.
Sounds like a lot.
It seems like a lot, yeah, but not in the brain. No. And every time you drink a shot of whiskey, you kill off, but you've got so many billion, I forget what it is, but yeah. So have your whiskey, but never, but so when in 1965, when this Hungarian man that escaped the Holocaust, researcher started to show that there was neuroplasticity in bird brains, he was squelched. He lost his funding. He lost his, it took 40 some years before neuroplasticity, the people that had squelched it at the beginning, one of the main people that squelched it 40 years later became the one that said, oh shit, it looks like I was wrong, like Fonzie. And I don't know if you ever heard Fonzie on it. You couldn't say he was wrong. It looks like I was, looks like I might have been mistaken here. Yeah. So what I'd like to do before we take a break is to say, I've threatened to do this and haven't done it, to say what I think Sid saw.
Go for it.
Okay. I think Sid saw that what's behind life, what people call, and this is revolutionary. And there was a day that he would have easily gotten burned at the stake. That what is behind life is not judging and punishing. but is pure love and understanding. That's what he saw. And he makes that very clear in The Enlightened Gardener Revisited. Pure love and understanding. That means, and as I go through these questions in the second part, I'm going to ask people to do a thought experiment. You know, Einstein had things that he saw that you couldn't, at least when he saw them, you couldn't experiment in form. So he did thought experiments. Dalai Lama talks about having thought experiments. David Bohm talks about having thought experiments and saying, this is what I've had a realization that looks really, really true, but I can't prove it in form. But what I can do is look at the form and say, if this were true, what I've realized, how would it manifest in form?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thought. I mean, the idea of having a thought experiment. So what would it look like when we come back and go through these questions? I'm going to ask people to, what if what we call God, and Sid says there's really only one principle. It's trying to point out that that principle is omniscient. It's omni-knowing, omni-aware, omni-knowing mind, universal mind, the intelligence of all things in form or formula. It's omni-aware, omni-consciousness. It's omni-creative. Power of thought, the universal thought. There's three principles that are really only one, trying to point out what mind is, what people call God is. Sid says that he saw that it was pure love and understanding. That's pretty revolutionary. Not pun. There's I don't know how, I haven't looked up recently how many people in the world still think that this God that you're supposed to love unconditionally has created this place called hell, that he's willing to put hell of a lot of people, and double metaphor there, for an eternity, which is what last I looked at is a really long time.
Sounds like a long time, definitely.
In torture. And so to say that this is pure love and understanding, that's revolutionary. Second thing is, which interestingly David Bohm and the quantum physicists are kind of supporting, he said that God, what people call God, is the energy of all things in form or formless, and it is the oneness. There can be nothing that can be separate from the whole.
Yeah.
Well, that means this, but there are atoms in this. There's electrons going 3/4 the speed of light around every atom in this pin, in whatever. There's this, everything we see is alive, not only us. Even when I love the fact that rocks, when plants are close enough to them that need trace elements, that somehow there's a communication between the rocks and the plants. And
I didn't know that. I knew
the rocks give up whatever trace elements they have that will give those nearby plants to grow.
Beautiful.
There's an intelligence, right? So that nothing is separate from the whole. Well, that's what David Bohm says in his book, right? Wholeness and the Implicate Order.
Yeah.
There's nothing separate. Now, so when I started seeing this for myself, whoa, what are the implications of this as far as psychiatric illness, as far as these things that we're going to address? What if that was true, that what's behind life is pure love and understanding, and there's nothing separate from the whole, and we've been given these gifts to become aware of what we are. I don't know that the rose or the lemon tree or even the fox can become aware that it's a manifestation in form of a divine energy. As Sid says on page 6 in the missing link, as humans, when the divine passes from the formless to the form, we are not only participants in this spiritual theater called life, we are spectators. We have the ability to come to a recognition. I love the word recognition because it means to know again. We already know it, but if I recognize you on the street, I've had to have seen you either on a picture or somewhere to see you again. I have to know something to recognize something. I have to know it already, but whatever was in the way of me experiencing my knowing is removed. Leonard Cohen said in the Anthem, everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets in. And I woke up the next morning and I said, wait a minute, I think maybe that's true, but the other, to me, even more true is everything has a crack in it. That's how the light gets out. Because it's already in there.
Yeah.
So when we come back, now before we go do that, and I want to leave room for you to any comments before we take a break, but have you heard me say that on my talks that do you know that, Jamie, in then 195 countries, every one of the countries, there's a organization that's based fully on unconditional love? That would be some supportive evidence that what's behind life is love and understanding, if that were true. Right? That would if there were in every 195 countries an organization fully based on unconditional love, and there is one. Have you heard me speak of that?
I don't know that I have.
Yeah. Do you know the name of the organization?
Not particularly.
Okay. It's called grandparenting. It's called grandparenting because most grandparents, not all, but a large percentage of grandparents love their grandchildren unconditionally.
Oh, cool. I did not know that.
Well, but is that not your experience of grandparents? That generally, not all, but parents want to love unconditionally, but they get caught up in their expectations of what other people will think.
Yeah.
What if this child? I think a lot of my spankings were. I don't want this boy, this oppositional, defiant boy, to end up in hell forever. So I may have to spank the shit out of him to save him from this eternity of.
Yeah, I've got lots of experience of parents. I don't have much experience of grandparents, but it sounds like it certainly sounds like the PR I've heard for grandparents, so I have no reason to doubt it.
Well, there's exceptions. There's grandparents can get into worry like any, but there's a lot of them that have moved from their internal realizations and wisdom to a place of unconditional love. Nothing that that's not that they won't let them know when they're going the wrong way or something and share if they can get permission and rapport, but their love for the grandchild is unconditional.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
It's not that I'm going to disown you if you marry that person or you do this or that or So I'm thinking that it might be a nice place to take a break and come back and hit those questions, because with this grounding.
I think that's a perfect idea, Bill. So we'll pause the recording here and be back.
But did you have anything that you wanted to say in response?
No, I think it's a good time to pause, and then we'll come back for those questions. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, but I want you to feel free if you had any opening thoughts about what I said. That people,
Well, it's funny, Bill, because I think just so much of what you said. It's funny when I first came to the principles, I came from, as you know, kind of NLP and hypnosis background, which was very cognitive. But the thing that brought me to this understanding was just knowing that it was possible to have a deeper, more soulful, heart-connected experience of people and of life, and so that's what kind of guided me to the principles. And well, I'll tell you something funny that I think reflects a lot of what you've been saying. So as you know, I've listened to Sid's recordings, thousands of times, thousands of hours of recordings, and I just find them many of my deepest insights have come through listening to those recordings. And an experience I've had again and again and again is of listening to Sid say something. And when I first hear it, I'm like, oh, he's just saying that, right? So he'll say something like, he'll say something like, the mind does not belong to you and me. You just borrow it. And when I first, like the first 50 times I heard him say that, I'm like, I guess that's just a figure of speech. He's being a bit poetic. And that what I've really learned is to take him literally. I take Sid literally in what he says. And so like I'm listening to it one day, he's like, oh, he means it. He means that this.
We're using the power of.
Yeah, you got it. And, or when he says, you have to believe it's a spiritual world.
Right.
It's a spiritual world, or that life is a dream. I take him really, really literally, and I look, I've learned to take him more and more literally and what he says. And as I do, my experience of life becomes richer and deeper.
Yeah. Life is, was he said that the first time he came out of his mouth, he said, what? When somebody said, well, what is life? And what came out of his mouth was, life is a divine dream suspended in time, space, and matter.
Yeah.
And he went, what? To himself, he went, right? Yeah. Do you know the name? Was it Jim Croce? No, it wasn't Jim Croce. There was a song back in the 70s called Spiders and Snakes.
Oh, I don't know it.
Oh, you don't know it?
No.
Well, it's about.
I only know the bad Leroy Brown. That's the only Jim Croce track I know.
Spiders and Snakes. And I can't say his name, but it's about, girls mature faster than we do as boys in so many ways. But this little girl has gotten to the point where she's kind of fascinated with this boy, and he hasn't gotten there yet. I mean, he's always, putting spiders down, putting spiders down her dress, or, scaring her with spiders. And she tries to say, I don't like spiders and snakes. I just want to, I don't, it's not just, I want to go to a different level of relationship, Well, he had, and I haven't gotten, I'm going to find the words, because he had his first album and he had a whole, he had a whole song. What if life is just a divine dream? And I thought this was about the time that Sid was having his experience. And the whole song was, that, what if all of this is a divine dream that we're in, Well,
I know for people listening to this, Bill, a lot of people are going to go, what do you mean? So I've got my own kind of take on that. But as you say that, what do you mean, Bill?
Well, if nothing is separate from the whole, and we are divine energy in a form that's been given the personal use of mind, the personal use of consciousness, and the personal use of divine thought, universal thought, we've been given the personal use of these attributes of God. If I had a couple that said, we don't like you using the word God. I said, that's fine. What word do you want me to use instead? They said, we like Dave. I said, oh, that's fine. Okay. So there's these three principles that are all attributes of Dave. Doesn't matter. It's a label. It's trying to point to some truth, right? And there's no doubt to me that there is an intelligence in the universe. I look outside even right now, it takes my breath away sometimes. So there's universal mind, that there's no doubt, even this virus, and we could talk about that in a whole nother thing, but that it's conscious, it's aware, and it's creative. It keeps and there is a consciousness, there's a universal consciousness, there's a universal knowledge, there's a universal creative power that we've been given an opportunity to, while we're here. And I think even afterwards it continues, we're just not burdened by the form, to use that to navigate ourselves through this world of form. But we're not separate. We're not separate from that which we seek. Sid said, you're not what you are, he says that you are what you seek. Well, I can't wrap my intellect around that, Jamie, but my truth meter goes on truth. It's like the time that I sat in front of that woman at West Virginia University who had been awake for 44 hours despite 800 milligrams of quetiapine or Seroquel and 2100 of lithium. And she was speaking at about 180 miles an hour and had been up for 44 hours. And I got her to stop for 40 seconds or whatever. And I told her that she was perfectly mentally healthy. She just didn't know it. That she'd gotten caught up in some thoughts, and it doesn't matter what they were. She gave life to some thoughts that had dysregulated her entire system in her form, and even caused epigenetic changes, turned on some genes that have no business being turned on, so that you're trying to express things to me, and I've sat here for 5 minutes. I can't make out one word that you've said, because that ability to express what is gone right now. But you at your core are perfectly healthy, unscathed, unscratched. Well, 6 months later, when she's in nursing school and I'm presenting with her at the grand rounds at West Virginia University, and she's sitting right next to me, and one of the residents, when we got through, I'm sure you probably heard this, said, what did you think when Dr. Pettit, in your full-blown psychotic state, told you that you were perfectly mentally healthy? Do you remember what she said?
I don't hit us, Bill.
She said, well, the first thought I had, she was a cute little gal, she was about 26, was her 7th admission in 5 months, or 5th admission in 7 months, whatever. I think it was 7th admission in 5 months, but something like, and she said, my first thought was, oh my God, they've given me a psychiatrist that's crazier than I am. Which is, to me, is incredible. Here in her full-blown psychosis, awake for 44 hours, unable to, something says, that's freaking crazy what he just said.
Yeah.
Right? But then she got real quiet and she said, and then another thought came rather quickly from some other place. And I knew that what he had just said was absolutely true. And that's when the healing started.
Yeah. And you've mentioned the truth meter a couple of times in this conversation, Bill, and what struck me is that truth meter, the kind of when something kind of rings that bell, because it's touching us at a deeper level. It's not the The truth meter isn't an intellectual truth meter.
No.
It's a heart truth meter. It's a spiritual
Soul,
truth meter.
soul,
And
soul, mind, spirit, soul. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a thing that, well, you'll be familiar with this. There's a thing called the mystical experience scale, which is used as an empirical measure in psychological studies. And one of the qualities that they measure is they basically have half a dozen qualities that determine whether, how much of a mystical experience someone has had.
Interesting.
And one of the qualities is the noetic sense, the sense that this is true beyond any material or sensory. No, so like the sense that you know something to be true even more than you know things like your name and your address and that sort of thing. And that also describes all the insights that I've had into these principles. It's like I know it, even if I could pass a lie detector test, even if I couldn't do the math for someone on why it's true.
Right. Right. There's a place of knowing. It's that place of, when our personal mind is quiet enough, then divine mind is unimpeded. It's like the 50-year-old lady that said to me after I did my interview when I'm retired psychiatrist now. I'm a mental health educator or 3 principles coach, but I even like mental health educator better than coach, because coach does see what the person's abilities are, like a sports coach, and then helps people realize the abilities they have to their fullest, right? But an educator is from the Latin to draw out what's already there in its fullness. And so I see myself as I don't know why I went in that direction from what you said, but then do you remember what you were saying?
Yeah, well, we were just talking about that truth meter, and what you
Oh,
said,
yes.
which I really like, is that when that second thought came, when she realized that what you said was true, that was
From her soul.
simultaneous with the initiation of the healing process.
And it wasn't from her intellect. It was from the psychosomatic. I mean, the psyche is the mind, the soul, the formless, the formless aspect of being human, which has been recognized by the Greeks and by people centuries. But it's just that they haven't been able, like you said initially, haven't been able to measure it, and but you can see its effect. So shall we do these? I
think that'd be great. Let's hit the questions.
Yeah.
Where would you like to start, Bill?
Start with the first one,
Yeah, so I'll read out the question. So as Sarad had said, menopause is something that's really talked about, the hormonal imbalance, which leads to the physical health issues such as brain fog, hot flushes, insomnia, etc. She said, I'd love Bill's take on how understanding the principles could make a difference to that.
Okay. So I'm going to ask people as they listen to, I'm going to say things that your intellect is going to have a hissy fit.
Right.
And thank your brain for, I'm going to ask you to thank your brain for sharing its comments, and not believe anything I say either. As Sid says, then you've given up your free will to think, yourself. But just to listen and kind of what you were just talking about, see which way that truth meter moves within you, even if you can't explain why it's moving in a certain direction. So this brings up a bigger issue of, and that people that are interested, because he's puzzled by it, but Robert Sapolsky's book Behave, which is 700 pages, he goes through all the things that people think cause behavior in the present paradigm. Hormones, genes, environment. What he doesn't understand is levels of consciousness. So as he says at the end of it, he said, to summarize it, it's complicated. Nothing seems to cause anything. So,
and Bill, just to make sure I'm on the same page, are you saying that would you describe things like brain fog, hot flushes, insomnia as behavior? Are you putting them in that category, or are they a different thing?
Well, let me just, let me just continue.
Okay.
And I'll try to get back right to that. I want to speak to simplicity. My late wife, who died in 2000 after 31 years of us being married, looked at me in 1984 when I was making this complicated. She said, "Bill, this is really simple, isn't it?" I said, "Susan," she had these big blue eyes. I said, "What makes you say that this is simple?" She said, "Well, I see that moment to moment, every human being on earth is one of two places. They're either in their life or they're in their thoughts. Either in their life or they're in their thoughts. They're either in the now or they're in the now thinking about something, figuring it out rather than being present. When I was in Prague, I was walking one day and I saw these kids speaking Czech, and they were playing and running, and they were thinking, but they were not in their thoughts. They were present. I saw an elderly couple with white hair walking hand in hand, looking lovingly at each other. They were thinking, but they weren't in their thoughts. They were in the present moment with each other. So I'm going to ask, the research generally shows that activation of the stress response up to 30 minutes a day, we're built to, it's not a problem. We're meant to be able to spend 30 minutes a day, because like animals, you might spend 30 minutes escaping a predator or something, or something happens. Once you get between 30 minutes and 3 hours, you go from ease, and I'm just putting this in simple terms, you go from ease to dis-ease. And I'm suggesting that a lot of these symptoms that we're going to talk about in this discussion are love letters, alarms, but love letters trying to wake us up to the fact that we are giving way too much attention to the thoughts that we're producing with our personal mind, and that we've lost contact with the spirit, and we're not in our lives, we're in our thoughts. And that it'll affect our mood, it'll affect our level of serenity, it'll affect our level, our quality of our thinking, it'll affect us physically. I'm just asking people to be open to that possibility. And that if we'll have the thought experiment, if what's behind life is totally benevolent, totally beneficent, meaning wishing well and being well, love and understanding, then how could that be true? Okay, so I have a woman that comes to me. It just happens. Not everybody that goes through menopause has brain fog, hot flashes, and insomnia. They don't. Now, it's hard to talk about, because then people think that you're judging them, or you're telling, is this just about, if you understand the system, how the system works, then if you come upon menopause and you're at peace in the world, spending less than 30 minutes a day, this is where research could be done. And that you're experiencing at least less than 30 minutes a day, and you're living at least 90% of every day in the present moment rather than in your thoughts.
Mm.
And people, that's one of the things I think most people, and I would ask your comment, they would say, I'll take an example, which is common. They'd say, before I saw the principles, I was spending 20% at some level of peace, and about 80% of the time in some level of anxiety or some level of depression. Our good friend Dickon Bettinger had the humility to say, I was up to 4 hours a day of meditation to try to control the anxiety that I was creating.
Right.
Principles. Okay. My wife went through menopause without a symptom. Hormones, even testosterone, does not make people more aggressive. If somebody is aggressive and in a stressed state of mind, it makes them more aggressive.
Mm.
If somebody is in a healthy state of mind, more testosterone makes them more productive.
Interesting.
We forget that these hormone shifts are occurring in people that are one of the infinite levels of understanding, consciousness, awareness that Sid talks about.
Mm.
So a lady comes to me. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go on, Bill.
A lady comes to me, and then feel free at any time. Here's when I first really saw this, and this is when I tell people I wish I was a female, because I would be less apt to get stoned at this. But she came and she came initially, and this was a president of a company, her own company, CEO, who was having every month 3 to 4 days where she would have to turn over her business to her first lieutenant because she was unfunctionable, unable to function during those 4 days. She was one time at a national thing where she was giving an award, a national award, and she was in the bathroom sobbing uncontrollably for, she said, no reason. Okay. Now, later she saw she was spending 12 to 14 hours a day in stressful thinking, activating the stress response, so that her body was, any hormonal shift, was magnified in her body, and her lack of understanding of experience, she would then have thoughts about her experience. Okay. So she comes to me with a totally another problem with one of her children, and about 4th or 5th, I don't know, 6 weeks later, she said, I had my first period without those 3-4 days, and I didn't even know that flow was coming until it started. Could this be because I'm feeling calmer and more quiet and more present? And I said, well, what do you think? And it stayed that way after 20 some years of severe premenstrual dysphoria. Severe. It was gone. And about, I don't know, 8 months later, she said, last month I had symptoms about 20% of what they used to be. But I saw them as love letters. I mean, this was before I saw them as love letters. She might have not have used, but I saw them as information that allowed me to go to quiet. And I saw, oh my gosh, I've been going too fast, or I've been worrying about this, or spending a whole time in my thinking, my personal thinking, and trying to figure things out. And that was my alarm. That was me letting me know that was my alarm system. So all I would say is that it's not no shoulds. This is not about shoulds. It's not there's something wrong with us if we have, but the more we understand the system, number one, we'll be less frightened by our physical experience.
Sure.
There'll be an internal place of joy where even significant pain can't take away the joy. It doesn't mean that you like being in pain, but there's a place that with understanding that can't be touched even by significant discomfort. Number two, that's all I'll say. I think it makes, that resonates for people, that if somebody is stressed 94% and another person is stressed 3%, Sid says we're all gonna get lost, but the more level of understanding you have, the less often you'll get lost, the less severely you'll get lost, and the more quickly you will recover, and the more fully you will recover.
Yeah.
You won't just recover 50% or 80% and then have 20% to where you're more susceptible to the next challenge that comes in life. I'd love it if we even start using the word challenges rather than stressors. Because when we use the word stressors, we're giving something inert power that it does not have.
Sure.
And again, no shoulds, no judgment. It's a challenge. And we, as human beings living in form, there are times and places where we're more sensitive than others. All of us have our sensitive areas that we're going to take on or create, I would say, create more dysregulation, more stress, mental stress. For every 100 units of challenge, it's one thing to create 7 to 15 units of stress and then recover from it, recognize it and recover from it, versus 85 to 90% and to stay constantly. And then when you have symptoms that are created by that state of dysregulation, you get even more upset, because now not only am I dealing with my son who's won't, but now I'm having migraines and I'm having irritable bowel syndrome, and
Sounds like a tough day at the office.
it sounds like an unwinnable game.
Well, Bill, the thing that strikes me, and I think I don't want to skip past this because I think it's crucial. The point you made about where as physical, physical
Right.
beings, we're built to be able to handle with no trouble at all up to 30 minutes of fight or flight a day. So if you look at the average bunny rabbit living in the countryside near where I live, that little bunny rabbit is having to run for its life several times a day. And yet most of the day it's relaxed, it's eating carrots, it's having sex, life is good. It's not running up psychotherapy bills or on medication or anything like that. And what I'm hearing is that once we're spending 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours plus in a state of fight or flight that is fundamentally thought generated, it's worrying about the a meeting next week or about the economy or about this or that, then the neurochemical environment that we're hanging out in is going to produce a bunch of different effects than the same neurochemical environment when it's at peace. And that, to me, that looks like something that's so, it's almost like the elusive obvious. Like, of course, a person who's got X amount of stress hormones running through their bloodstream for an extended period of time is going to have a different systemic response to various things than the person who's at ease. And that, to me, that looks like it just really is worth underlining. So I wanted to, that was me underlining it.
Yeah, no. I mean, from that article, and it's not gospel, but it's, I think it's in the ballpark. If you get over 3 hours on a regular chronic basis, what I'll call chronic mental stress, you're going to move from dis-ease to disease.
Mm.
And if you don't hear that alarm, you're probably going to move to disability.
Oh, when you say
that alarm, you're probably going to move to death. And sometimes people skip through. George Bransky used to say, sadly, for some people, death is an early warning sign. Because
The
it's
thing
the
that
only,
strikes me though, Bill, you're not saying if someone one day spends all day stressed, then they're at risk of disease. It's more the habitual day after day. Is that correct?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And especially if they spend that one day, see, nobody ends up in the we'll just take mental psychiatric illness. Nobody ends up in the psychiatric hospital because of one thought.
Mm.
They don't. They end up in the psychiatric unit because of the 20,000 thoughts they have about that thought.
Mm.
I'll give you an example. And when I was in Bradenton, 85 to 90, and this was about 1.5 years, 2 years after I met Sid. One day I was in Tampa and over the bridge there from Bradenton to Tampa, and I was at a very busy intersection, and it turned my light turned red for me to where I had to stop, and a whole bunch of people went across. The thought came to me, I could hit the accelerator really hard. I bet I could kill at least 20 people.
Hmm.
That wasn't necessarily the thought that I wanted, right? Unwanted thought. And I had enough. I wasn't terribly, because of what I'd learned, seeing about the system, I wasn't frightened by it. It's not anywhere as clear as it is now, but I wasn't frightened by it enough. And I was kind of I was curious more than anything. I kind of looked towards my brain and said, you got any better ideas? I'm going to wait here to see what else you got. In the meantime, I'm going to stop my car. Right. But I didn't start analyzing that thought about what it meant about me as a person, or I just got as quiet as I knew to get at the time. And the next thing that came to me, kind of like my friend, the little lady, I'm blocking her name, Molly, another thought came to me then in that quiet, and it said, Bill, you're exhausted. You're not taking care of yourself. You're not getting enough rest. You're not taking care of yourself. So the quality of that thought was a love letter. I don't get thoughts of killing people when I'm in rested well-being.
Well, Bill, it's a really good point, because when I'm working with clients around what they've described as issues, whether it's addiction or compulsions or whatever, and they've got the thing, whether it's the negative thought or the addiction or whatever, they've got that kind of as the enemy, and I'm like, oh no, that's wisdom in action. And for a lot of people, that's like, how can that be wisdom? How can injecting heroin be wisdom in action? But what you've just described is exactly how it looks to me, that the person at their current level of understanding is doing what makes sense to take care of themselves as best they can. Right.
And it doesn't mean that you're likely going to die if you continue to do that. But that if you don't look in a different direction for the answer, because you're not going to be able to do it intellectually.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that whole idea of hormones could be, a whole hour, but I hope that gives a little bit okay.
That's great. And then Sarah followed up saying, also epilepsy, I have no control over when I'll have a seizure, and the seizures I've had have taken me to hospital. How can understanding the principles act as prevention over such a condition? But here's the interesting thing, Bill. I asked Sarah, I said, I'll ask Bill about that. And I'm curious, knowing everything that you already do about the principles, what's your sense of the answer to this question? And she said, I think the seizures are an outward reflection of what's going on in the internal world and what they're pointing a need for more of. For instance, self-care, balance, inner calm, peace of mind. And I loved her answer. And so if there's anything you'd add, I'd love to hear it. But I think she kind of knocked it out of the park there.
I think she did. And the more spiritual understanding she has of the connection between our spiritual nature, our formless nature, divine nature, whatever, and our psychological thought created nature, as that moves, as that gently moves by, just as we talked about earlier, just being grateful for what you have seen. You can't move from intellectually trying to figure out how to see more. All you have to do, I mean, that's so ironic because it is about being grateful for what you have seen and living in the present moment, in the now. You know, I love it when Sid says all infinity is just an infinite number of nows. It's not a big deal. That's all there is now. That's all there ever is. That's all there ever will be, is now.
Yeah.
And so I think she's seen something that that it is an alarm system, but even it's more than an alarm system. It's interesting. What do seizures do? They cut off your ability for a while to engage your analytical thinking. That's
They
why
certainly do.
That's why we use electroconvulsive therapy.
Yeah.
Because it knocks people's ability out to use their analytical thinking against themselves, to hurt themselves with the gift of thought, the personal use of mind. And how did it even come to where we do things like, which some people see as barbaric, electroconvulsive therapy? Now we're putting electrodes deep inside the brain and stimulating, and we're doing transmagnetic stimulation. But all of those things, when we're giving IV ketamine, and we're spending billions of dollars of research money on psilocybin and ecstasy, and all of these things are dissociatives that disconnect people from the content of their thinking.
Yeah.
But all it takes is some understanding where you're not frightened by any thought that you have, that you don't need to have electroconvulsive therapy or deep or deep brain stimulation. And so what happened was, and I used to know the years, but I can't say them right now, but there was a time when neurologists noticed that their patients with seizure disorders would get depressed. I don't know whether any more than other people, but I could see why, if at a certain level of understanding, they might get depressed more, because they never knew when this thing was going to happen. But if they had a series of epileptic fits close enough together, neurologists started realizing the people came out of their depression.
Yeah, interesting.
They observed, they were observers. They said, oh, wow. Could it be that these epileptic seizures are bringing the person out of their depression?
Did they see that, or did they just do it as a kind of oh, hey, we could use that, and
no, some of them, they saw that. They thought,
wow, that's cool.
So
that's
they
that's
saw,
very
so
insightful.
So
That's
then
very
they started inducing seizures.
Yeah.
When they're and then they started doing it with people that didn't have seizure disorders. They initially used things like camphor and lowering people's blood sugar with insulin, and people died, that because it wasn't scientific. I mean, but they did start to see, and then somebody said, well, what if I could give an electric impulse that would cause this but we could, and then of course people would get fractures, and then they came up with realizing you could give curare and paralyze the muscles so that they no longer, there's a difference, Jamie, between a seizure and a convulsion. The seizure occurs in the brain. The convulsion occurs in the body.
Got it. Yeah.
So with the curare, they took away the convulsion.
Just had the seizure.
And they just had the seizure.
As a reset button.
As a reset button. Now, if and I've got stories that I won't go into today, but many of them, and the research shows that if you just do the electroconvulsive session, then you will likely get out of the depression. But if the person, when they're able to get 60, 90 days out, they're able to get their ability to use analytical thinking again, if they haven't learned anything before long,
Back where they
their mood will-
started.
one fellow who owned a big company, a big audiovisual company, he told me how he came in with suicidal. He told me how he had had electroshock therapy and it brought him out of his depression. And I said, well, how did you run your business without being able to think analytically? He said, 95% of it, I didn't need it. I realized I didn't need analytical thinking. I was so quiet inside that I saw what to do.
Mm.
And when I needed somebody to look at analytics, I'd get my first lieutenant, my vice president, whatever, to look at it, and he would come back with me with the data.
Yeah.
But 95%, I just knew what to do. I somehow, quote, somehow, when people don't understand the universal mind, the best they can come up with, whether it's Sapolsky or anybody, is somehow I knew. And so he said, but gradually, after about 90 days, my mood started going down to where I'm suicidal again now. I said, Joe, how's your analytical thinking doing? He said, oh, it's
great.
it's back to normal.
Yeah.
And then he turned almost white, Jamie.
Yeah.
He said, wait a minute. Are you saying those two are related? The one going up? I said, what do you think, Joe?
Mm.
And now we had a contract.
Mm.
What if I could teach you to use your analytical thinking when it was necessary and not use it when it wasn't necessary? Wow. He said, wow. Now I've got a birdie ready for the worms.
Yeah. Bill, staying with the kind of with the brain related stuff, Greg
Right.
had asked, in recent years, my dad has been experiencing a decline in his short-term memory. We have a history of Alzheimer's in our family, so we've got a fear of the inevitability of this for my dad. And I wonder, can we think ourselves into a worsening of our memory, or conversely, can we think ourselves into an improvement of our memory? If there's a way, is there a way to understand or apply the principles to the physiological aging of our brains?
So I'm going to ask for an old man break here, but before I take the old man break, and notice even in his wording, is a way we can think ourselves into health. And that's, to me, a misunderstanding of the principles. I would say, is there a way that we could have an understanding, a realization of the connection between our spiritual nature and our psychological, our thought created nature? Is there a way that might affect the presence or course of cognitive decline?
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me, Greg, because Bill, because my mom, who's in her 80s, during lockdown, she had a significant decrease in kind of lucid, and she's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. But what I've noticed is she and I feel, when we speak regularly on the phone, on FaceTime, we feel much more deeply connected now than when she was firing on all cylinders intellectually. It's like a lot of her, I don't know, a lot of the things where we would kind of be at odds with each other, that's just fallen away. And so it's kind of interesting to me, because on the one hand, it feels like that kind of the truth of her being is closer to the surface than ever, despite the kind of diminishment of her cognitive capacities.
It's almost like it took a turning off of the ability to use that the way she used to use it.
Yeah, yeah. It's sort of like
What has
the,
allowed is as Cohen says, it just needs a crack,
yeah,
that the soul is less impeded and you're feeling that in your conversations with her.
yeah, absolutely.
I'd like to answer that more fully, and I'll take about a 3-minute break. Is that okay?
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, you wanted to say some more about the Alzheimer's question, Bill.
Well, again, this is important that people know that we're all doing the best we see moment to moment. As Sid says, when we're going along and something is unknown to us, it looks complex. And then we have a realization and it looks simple.
Yeah.
So that's just life, okay?
Yeah.
But one of the things that happens with chronic mental stress is that there is systemic activation of what they call the inflammatory response. And so there's chronic systemic inflammation. And between 80 and 110 physical diseases have been implicated as signs of manifestations of chronic systemic inflammation.
Yeah.
For instance, even something as, quote, benign, but really irritating as tinnitus appears to be a manifestation of chronic systemic inflammation.
Mm.
Now, so if you think of it as a love letter that you get ringing and you go, oh, and you look and say, oh God, yeah, I'm spending 8 to 10 hours a day in my thoughts versus in my life in stressful, with worry, guilt, resentment, upset, overanalysis, unresolved grief, right? So one of the things that has been implicated, not only in type 2 autoimmune diseases, type 2 diabetes, even juvenile diabetes, depression, chronic systemic inflammation, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinsonism, chronic systemic inflammation. Major factor. Not about guilt, not about, it's just, so I told this story about my sister who died in May of 2020. She was only 15 months older than I. She was born in 41. I was born in 42. She had her 2 beautiful 19 and 16-year-old daughters were killed by a drunk driver visiting us in Florida, in Bradenton, Florida, and on the 4th of July, 1986. There's no judgment on my part. Who knows at even the level I'm at now. Although I'm not frightened by death like I was then. I think she lived her last 8 years of her life in a dementia unit. She was a brilliant woman, valedictorian of her class, could have been, she was born even 10 years later, could have been president of a university or whatever she wanted to be. And she was brilliant, but she spent their last 8 to 9 years of her life in a dementia unit, progressively unable to have any conversation that made any sense. Now, she kept a nice feeling. I think that dementia kept her from the pain that she was unable to come to peace with. So even if she heard somebody mention Kathy or Sarah's name to within months before she died, she said, I talked to them the other day. They're doing fine. They're doing fine. So September of 2019, Linda and I are getting ready to go to be at the event, what do they call it? The Aviva event, in Spain.
In Spain?
Yeah. And we're going to actually speak. And I said, let's go see, because of something that came up, I wasn't able to be at a family reunion. We had our last family reunions every other year for the last 3 or 4 times in Connecticut, because she was always going to be in a dementia unit. So instead of rotating, we came there, and my 5 brothers and sisters and I. So I said, let's go see Peggy. She said, great idea. And then we'll fly from there to Spain. So we go to see her in Connecticut. And for 3 days, we talk, 2 or 3 days, we talk. And there's nothing that makes sense. And yet you were laughing and having a wonderful time.
Yeah.
The whole conversation, there's no there. She would say something. I wouldn't try to. I'd just say something. She'd laugh. I'd laugh. She'd say something. We'd laugh. We had wonderful visits. As we were getting ready to leave, I sensed that this was the last time, that she was ready to go home to her original home. I just sensed it, that this was probably the last time we were going to see her. And I think Linda, my wife Linda, did too. And my wife Linda is very intuitive. And she came up to Peggy as we were getting ready to leave, and she said, "Peggy, it's all right, isn't it?" Wow, what a question or a statement. I kind of went, what, Peggy looked at her and said, "Linda," this is a woman who had made no sense for 3 days. "Linda, it's really all right." She took Linda's cheeks and she kissed her softly on the lips and said, "Linda, I love you so very much." Wait a minute. What happened to the dementia? The soul is still there. So now it's my turn to say goodbye, Jamie. This is my older sister of 15 months, and I had tremendous respect and love for her. And I said, "Peggy," I said, "would it be okay if I kissed you on your right cheek?" And she said, "Of course, Billy." She called me Billy. So I kissed her on the right cheek, and without permission, I really quickly kissed her on the left cheek. And I said, "Well, I didn't really have permission to kiss you on the left cheek. Was that okay?" And her little blue eyes sparkled. She said, "Billy, it was perfect." It was perfect. Wait a minute. What's going on here? Just what you said. I've had somebody, I told that story one time, and somebody in the Three Principles community that's been many, many years said, "Now it makes sense to me." And I said, "What?" She said, "My father had trouble getting caught up from angry thoughts and memories from the past. He got Alzheimer's. My mother said, do you know that the last 2 years that your father was alive were the most tender that we had been since the very first years of our life together? Because he could no longer hurt himself, Jamie, with the power of thought. And his soul was free to, now at some people would say a heavy cost.
Yeah, sure.
But that to me is another evidence that universal mind is respecting our free will, but it's always trying to help us.
Well, and it's giving us what it can at the level of understanding we're at, which makes total sense to me.
Yeah, that we can take. Yeah. So.
Bill, I've just had an idea. You had already said to me that we could do a follow-up session with these questions. I think what I'll do is we'll get that scheduled in, and I'll put out a wider call for questions, because these are just fantastic. And I know you've got a program coming up, so it'd be a great context for people to hear about that as well. We've only got a few minutes now, but would you say a little bit about the program that you're kicking off later this year?
Yeah. I mean, I think all I would have to say is that it's going to be a 6-month program. It's going to hopefully start in mid-March. And it's going to be 2 hours twice a month. There's going to be time frames at 2 time frames, the same program, so that it, one appeals to people.
Who's it for, Bill? The
logistics. It's for human beings that want to be more at peace and live in the now more than in their thoughts.
Got it. So it's about living in the now more than in your thoughts. And so it's not, for instance, aimed at therapists and change workers. It's for all of us, private individuals. All of
us human beings who want to live in the present moment with a loving, light heart.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And Bill, where can people find out about that? I know you've got a new website, drbillpettit.com. Is that going to be the best place to find it?
Yes, that'll be the best place. And within about 10 days from your and my conversation today on the what, the 19th or so.
Yeah, we're not going to release this until
Right.
the website's up and got
Right.
the seal of-
Website's up, but where the program isn't fully up to where you can, yeah, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Okay.
www.doctor, that's Dr. Bill Pettit, PETTIT.com.
Yes.
Yeah. So I really encourage people to go and check out what you're doing. And it sounds like a great program, Bill. Go ahead.
The email, I think that it's bill@drpettit.com is my business email that my business manager will screen, so if I get 50 or 60, she'll screen and then connect me to the one. She'll respond or ask me how to respond, or so Bill at Dr. Pettit, Bill@drbillpettit.com.
Got it. Okay, so that's go to www.drbillpettit.com or pop an email to bill@drbillpettit.com.
Right.
Thank you, Bill. Always a huge pleasure to speak with you. And we'll sort out that follow-up so we can get to more of these questions.
Good. Give Kathy my love.
I will.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.